Okay. Hi, everybody. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. It's great to welcome you to today's webinar in partnership with Bureau Veritas. Title of the webinar is Boosting the ROI of Sustainability, Data-Driven Strategies That Pay Off. I'm Mark Siegel, the founder and CEO of ESG Today, and I'll be guiding us through the session today. Before we go on, I just want to put out some quick housekeeping notes. First, participants in this webinar are eligible for a 30-minute complimentary consultation with our panelist, Sarah Boyd from Bureau Veritas. And you should be able to scan the QR code that's on your screen right now to arrange that. We'll leave it there for a few seconds, and we'll post it one more time at the end of the webinar also in case you miss it right now. Also, we hope to have time for some Q&A on today's webinar. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to write them in the comments section, and we'll get to as many of them as we can if there's time. Okay, so let's get right into it. Let me set the stage. One of the most prominent themes we've seen emerge over the past few years is a demand for sustainability to go beyond ambition and to actually deliver value in order to be, sustainable. And now we're actually seeing that for many companies, sustainability is no longer a cost center; it's actually a profit engine. Just as an example, a PwC 2025 Global CEO survey found that 1 in 3 CEOs report direct revenue increases from climate investments, and 2/3 say sustainability has reduced costs or had zero negative impact. So this isn't theory. This is money already being made and costs already being cut. And today, our plan is to show you exactly how to replicate that success. You'll learn data-driven strategies to boost sales for low-carbon products, cut costs for decarbonization and data collection, and protect your balance sheet against climate-related risks. We're joined today by Jan Riz and Sarah Boyd from Bureau Veritas, a world leader in testing, inspection, and certification, supporting 400,000 clients in building more sustainable businesses. Jan and Sarah lead AI track solutions by Bureau Veritas and have helped prominent companies across industries turn sustainability challenges into measurable results through integrated data, software, and consulting services. So let's have them introduce themselves. Jan, Sarah, welcome. Please tell us more about yourselves. Let me start with Jan, if that's okay.
Cool. Hey everybody, Jan Riz. So I'm a senior advisor to Bureau Veritas, and also I was the co-founder and CEO of Align Incentives, which was acquired about a year and a half ago by Bureau Veritas, which was very much focused on, as the name says, aligning commercial incentives and societal incentives through better data and the use of software.
My name is Sarah Boyd, and I'm Chief Strategy Officer for AI Track Solutions at Bureau Veritas. And I previously was at Apple. I was managing product carbon footprinting for new product introductions. And I've spent over a decade working in sustainability in corporate and product sustainability and reporting and strategy. So I'm very glad to be here.
Okay, great. So let's just start, just to open. Jan, Sarah, from what you're seeing on the ground with clients, what's driving sustainability ROI? And, where are organizations still leaving money on the table?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So Bureau Veritas is known, it's familiar to many as, certification, inspection, and test. We have over 400,000 clients around the world. And over the past several years, we've been moving more and more into serving our clients' needs in sustainability, going on beyond compliance and regulations. And this year, Bureau Veritas actually launched its first sustainability trends report. It's based on BV's sustainability survey from 2025. It represents input from over 600 sustainability specialists from around the world. And so I want to show something from this report, if that's okay, because it's very relevant to our topic today. So just hold on one moment, I'll share my screen. All right, so as I said, this is based on feedback from over 600 specialists around the world in sustainability. And based on this feedback, on the question of what are your main motivations for sustainability investments, in 40% of the cases, the motivation is related to creation of business value. And that can be in the form of improved market positioning, increasing revenue, reduction of costs and improved financial performance through efficiency and waste reduction, improved operational performance, such as through deeper supply chain engagement. Also, particularly reduction of risk, regulatory risk with financial impacts in the form of carbon pricing or fines, and improved resilience in the face of more frequent climate-related hazards. So in this framework, looking at these categories of business value, you can see it in the framework of, sales and revenue, operational cost reduction, and risk reduction. And I think, Jan, you might have more to add on this as well.
No, I think you pretty much said it, but what I would maybe add is that if you think of these three categories, improve sales, reduce cost, and reduce risk, what we found is it's really increasing sales that gets the most energy, especially at the senior executive level, right? So um, bringing down sustainability from the corporate level down to the product level is really essential because that's where the sales are made, especially in a B2B context. And it varies very much by the industry you're in, et cetera. But focusing at the product level, bringing corporate sustainability down to the product level is really critical and adjusting to what your clients need. But anyway, that's where the excitement is, in our view, is really often mostly on sales.
Okay, great. So let me get right into it then, like to, a little more deep dive into some of our topics. In terms of revenue growth and carbon footprinting, Sarah, we hear a lot about customer demand for low carbon products. Can you really give us a sense of what the business case looks like for this?
Sure. So the business case for low carbon products, more sustainable products, is going to look different depending on the industry, depending on your vertical, your markets. But one example that I often turn to is HPE have done a very excellent job of communicating the business value of their sustainable products, more sustainable products. They've gone and they've communicated the value of this is $1.3 billion in revenue for their sustainability focused products. And this means meeting certain sustainability criteria. So for them, meeting certain criteria ensures market access to some very large institutional buyers like educational institutions, banks, financial institutions, but also governments, local, state, national governments. And it strengthens also their engagement with these customers who have preferences for or requirements for sustainability.
So
So that's at least one great example.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you there. Just in terms of that 1.3 billion, how did they get to that number? And more importantly, how can businesses identify and capture similar value in their own product portfolio?
That's a great question. So first, you want to see really what your sustainability criteria are for your market. And there may be green procurement standards, there may be customer-facing eco labels. For government purchasing, there may be public procurement guidelines or even laws and regulations that have sustainability requirements. The criteria may also be specific to the customer. The customer may have require commitments to set science-based targets or to share carbon emissions data or an LCA or product footprint information. And your first indication may be from your sales team coming to you for help in responding to an RFP or a bid or an RFQ where the customer is asking for this information. You could also reach out to your top customers and request their sustainability procurement guidelines if they have any. So it's the first step is really establishing your criteria. And once you've done that, for all of the markets you serve, then what is the contract value for those customers, really? Where the requirements are customer specific, you've kind of already done that job of understanding who those customers are exactly. You're through that part in defining which customers those criteria apply to. And where there is a market-wide, procurement guideline or eco-label, you'll need to understand how much of your market prefers or requires this. And many customer and market criteria for at the product level come back to LCA and product carbon footprints. And European policy has been shaping and guiding towards using that as the fundamental sort of building block. But there are over 450 eco labels out there in the market, which can be very confusing. Most of them are not based on LCA, and that's where some of these policies and regulations are coming in, where they're driving and pushing towards more LCA or, PCF, product carbon footprint based claims. And so having the ability to provide product carbon footprints or LCAs for all of your products and provide them to customers on demand has been a huge strength to some of our clients. Wherever a customer defines a requirement, you have something ready to give them that basically covers all of your bases. So having comprehensive product coverage with LCAs, it used to be really seemingly impossible. But there are systems now that enable LCA at scale. And, I spent the first 10 years of my career doing a lot of product level assessments, and the need to scale just kept growing and growing over time. And the systems weren't keeping up, but that's changed in the past few years. And there's been a sort of revolution happening in activity-based LCA, product level LCA. And there are providers now who do this, and it's exciting to see these systems catching up. So when defining your approach to product sustainability and product sustainability communication, finding a provider who can do product carbon footprints at scale and who has the capability to use your product footprints also to inform your corporate footprint is a huge advantage.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Let's shift over now to talk about the cost side. One of the proven tools for prioritizing decarbonization investments, is the marginal abatement cost curve, or MACC. So, Jan, could you, for those of us who haven't used MACC framework before, can you walk us through how it changes decarbonization decisions?
Sure. Let me explain it because it's a bit of a mouthful. So MACC curves, I used to work for McKinsey a long time ago, and this was in the late 90s, has been popularized by McKinsey, and but now it's widely adopted. So are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, I can. Maybe it'd be really handy if, before you go on, you could just tell us what we're looking at, like what software this is.
Yeah. Sorry, this is actually AI Track, so the software that we use for our clients that enable you to quantify your corporate footprint, but also do it at the product level and identify how are you going to achieve your targets and what projects you should do. So I want to show you this because it actually explains what a marginal abatement cost curve is, I think, quite effectively. So let's say you have on the upper right side, if you follow my cursor, you have your business as usual emissions. You have a target and you wonder, okay, how am I going to effectively achieve my target in a cost-effective way, right? And you have hundreds of different choices, hundreds of different projects in scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 that you can go through, right? So now we just talked about sales. Now we talk about costs, right? So how do you achieve targets in a cost-effective way? How do you reduce as much as possible costs? So this marginal abatement cost curve is a very powerful tool, and let me make it a little bit larger here. What it does is it classifies everything you can do. You have it here in aggregated way. So, for example, I'm clicking on energy savings project. So these are all the energy savings projects that the company has across its hundreds of facilities, and it shows that on average, on the x-axis, it shows you how much carbon you can abate. So the broader that box, the more carbon you can reduce. And on the y-axis, it shows you what is the cost per ton abated, right? So the lower the box, if you go under 0, you save money. And the higher it goes here to the right, the more expensive these groupings are. But these are just average. So if I click on this, I would see all the way down to each facility. Some projects are, very cost effective and others are very costly. So it's just a great way to structure it. So there is a problem with that. So it tends to be static, right? So traditionally, the way this was done is as a consultant, you would come in and you would do an assessment like this. Two problems with that. One is the technology is available, the solutions in the market change constantly. And two is what's available varies quite a lot by geography. So if you're in Cape Town or in Oslo or even within the US in West Virginia, which has a very carbon intensive grid versus California, the technologies and their impacts are going to vary quite a bit. So the whole thing becomes quite complex. So it's quite expensive to put together. It's quite complex. So what we found is the most cost-effective way to do so is actually not so much rely on outside expensive advice that quickly changes because of what I just said, the evolving technologies and geographic variations. But it's more to give the tools to the people you have in-house so that every person who is responsible for energy in a facility, for example, can build their own little initiative. And through a verification process, it gets sort of built into what becomes a living marginal abatement cost curve for a company. And so we call it dynamic MACC curve. And so constantly that MACC curve evolves. And it's not something that is done one time by an outsider. It's something that lives within the organization and constantly evolves. So every year you can see how do we spend more of our resource on the left side so that we can reduce our costs and achieve our targets in the most cost-effective way, having this capability in-house. So that's kind of what the MACC curve is, and also its limitations, and what we believe is best practice in terms of enabling an organization to leverage the distributed intelligence, so to say.
Thanks. Yeah. So if I could just follow up, what would you say are quick wins that actually save money while cutting emissions?
Yeah, yes, they are quick wins, but I would actually say that's the wrong question. And what I mean by that is most companies very quickly are aware of what the quick wins are and take advantage of them. The real opportunity where companies leave money on the table is actually once you've done the quick wins, is that long tail of projects. And so where you need that financial discipline, but in a cost-effective manner, to be able to constantly identify and refine and learn from each other within the organization, right? So this facility did this with great results. Why not do more of it? Or we thought this project would be great, but actually it ended up being very costly. Let's make sure we create immediate visibility throughout the organization so that we all learn from it and don't repeat the mistakes. So it's that long tail optimization that's really the opportunity in our view. Yeah, and of course the quick wins they vary hugely by industry. So I'm not going to start listing each industry and the quick wins. But again, most companies kind of know what their quick wins are, right? So, but if you follow my cursor, most clients we have, and typically they're very large organizations, they have like thousands of different projects out there, and it's more about identifying how to optimize that long tail.
Okay, great. So Jan, while I have you here, maybe you can sort of walk me into like the third piece of the puzzle here. Risk management for balance sheet protection. How do you quantify climate-related risks in a way that really resonates with CFOs?
Yeah, and maybe let's step back for a second. So CFOs have typically they have multiple audiences, but two of them are investors. And so they have been, over the last 10 years, quite a lot of investor pressure. Actually, we've seen that pressure subside a bit, especially in the US, because it has become such a political topic. But it's internationally, we still see a lot of pressure. So that's sort of one layer of pressure. And the second one is really the operational risk mitigation, understanding risk at the operational level and reducing. Actually, let me share my screen again to bring this to life. Sorry, hold on. Here we go. Let me show this one here. So, and the way this works, essentially, once you've done your footprint, the key issue, what you can do is essentially fairly easily right? Especially if your footprint is granular, is not only corporate, but down to the product level, is to overlay your footprint with data, for example, water scarcity, the water scarcity for every watershed in the world, right? It's easy information. Most softwares now, good software sort of integrated, so you can overlay your footprint, your supply footprint with water scarcity issues, right? So, and what you do then, essentially, you model on two levels. You look at what if the world heats up in an uncontrolled way, for example. And so if that happens, there are a lot of physical risk, and you want to quantify these physical, for example, water scarcity risks, right? So drought risk, etc. So, and I'm pulling down like a bunch of different topics like coastal flood risk, eutrophication risk, what have you. The second approach is you look at what if we don't get our act together, or pardon me, what if we do get our act together from a regulatory standpoint and we start having high carbon taxes? And so we don't have such temperature rises. So the physical risks are going to be lower, but then you have financial risk, like carbon tax risks, right? And you want to understand where do these risks come from in your supply chain, right? So what we've seen is investor pressures for the last 10 years. TCFD was the main framework used. Now it's compliant with ISSB in sort of the ISSB framework today. But an increase in really understanding not only this high level pressure, but going down to the details and being able to quantify the risk in a very operational way for our clients has become more important, I would say now, or as important.
Sorry, I muted myself. So can you really make it like concrete and like, go through like a real example?
Yeah. So, I was talking to you before about risks let's take physical risks, right? So the typical approach, which in my view is a complete waste of time, is you ask your suppliers, what do you do in terms of water? How much water do you use, etc. So who cares? When your suppliers in Canada, we don't need to know how much water they use and what their practices are. So stop bothering, your suppliers is generally my advice. Instead, what you can do again, once you have a very granular footprint, you can overlay the data that you have with data that's easily available, that software packages, like this is AI track now, but there's a lot of packages that do this, that integrate watershed data, for example, and looks at how is that risk going to evolve over the next 20 years, right? And the key here is really to have a surgical approach. So instead of going and asking your suppliers, where do I want to, all your tier one suppliers, what their water practices are, let's drill down on, say, extremely high water risk by 2040. And this is where it's important to have data that goes into the product level, right? So, and we've changed the numbers here, but you can see at the product level, when I click on extremely high risk by 2040, cheese pops up. So let's drill down in cheese. I'm drilling down and I can see, okay, so cheese other, going down deeper, Spain, and especially a specific supply here, White Ebert, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, jumps out, right? And this is an outside-in analysis. Now, it could be that White Ebert is already doing a lot in terms of water recycling, etc. But that data, as long as you use it intelligently and humbly, enables you then to approach a supplier with a much more intelligent message. Instead of asking all these suppliers what they do about water, you have the data that enables you to identify real operational risk and approach them and say, like, this is what our data shows. It's outside in, could be very wrong. Let's discuss. And it's actually interesting for White Ebert, and that's where the align incentives are. If they really have a risk that is so big, they can then use this with other buyers as a commercial sales enablement tool to reduce other buyers' risks, right? So it decommoditizes often what are commodity product in the B2B space, right? So it's that kind of granular data that really enables you to understand better operational risks and intelligently interact with it. So I think that's an example of how to do so.
Okay, thanks, Jan. So let's move on to, the next, major piece of the puzzle, supplier engagement and data. One of the biggest pain points we hear a lot about is supplier data collection. It's expensive, it's time consuming. Sometimes the data quality is poor. Let me go over to Sarah. Sarah, how are leading companies solving this problem?
Thank you. That's a great question because we see this issue a lot, and really supplier data collection is a challenge that we hear about a lot from sustainability leaders that we're talking with. And there has been some really fantastic work done in the standards and protocols for data exchange, from PACT to Catena X. But there's also many tools for outreach. But there are some very stubborn challenges that remain in response rate and in data quality. And the story that we often see is that a company starts with a spend-based analysis. They understand who their top top suppliers are. And you reach out to your top suppliers in terms of carbon emissions for emissions data, and you can hit a wall with low response rates, particularly beyond those top suppliers, and getting a complete picture of your corporate footprint. And so just to step back for a second, and looking at the approaches to carbon footprinting for an organization, there's three main methods, often used in combination. One is using spend-based LCA, which takes a spend amount and applies an emission factor that's an average for the industrial sector, very broad. There's activity-based LCA, where you use a unit quantity of your products or components, and you apply the specific emissions factor for that material or component. And within that, there's several levels. Some providers will take an existing LCA model and apply that like an emission factors, and others will develop customized LCA models to represent your specific product. And finally, there is supplier data collection, where the supplier-specific emission factor is collected and used. And the challenge with supplier data collection is its response rate, is the biggest challenge, particularly beyond tier one and getting visibility beyond tier one. McKinsey did an analysis that found that only about 10% of tier one suppliers answer with good quality data. And for most industries, you need to reach beyond tier one, beyond your direct suppliers, to have a clear understanding of what your supply chain impacts are. A lot of the heavy impacts are further upstream. And there is also the problem of data quality and year-to-year variation in emissions that are provided by suppliers. So this can also be a challenge, not just to inventory development, but to that variation over time that you see in your scope 3 inventory, and having it be predictable and plannable. So if you have an absolute scope 3 target and supplier emissions are volatile, you can be stuck with an inability to show progress on your scope 3. And that's why it's important, as Jan was saying, instead of rushing out and asking all of your suppliers for data, which is a ton of work, and as you mentioned, expensive and time consuming, it is better to do the analytics first and then surgically reach out, and not just reach out for data, but to get commitments on interventions, on specific actions where it matters. So whether it's tier one or tier two or tier three suppliers, and where your activity-based LCA gives you the insight, you can identify what actions can be taken to really move the needle on your emissions in scope 3. So companies are solving the supplier data collection challenge by having an activity-based inventory in year one, and using that to inform a precise approach to reaching out to suppliers. And having an activity-based LCA modeling inventory that is representative of your products allows you to engage surgically and get commitments that will drive reductions and ultimately save you cost.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So for everyone out there listening and watching right now, we're going to try something new, or at least new for us. We'd like to hear from you about what's keeping you from reaching your ROI sustainability goals. So we're going to try to do a quick poll. It's the first time we've done this, so bear with us. So here we go. Okay, hopefully everyone can see it. So the question is, what's your biggest barrier to achieving ROI from sustainability initiatives? Lack of data quality, difficulty quantifying impact on ROI, insufficient executive buy-in, limited budget, and unclear where to start. Okay, great. I see answers are coming in, so I guess people can actually see it. Okay, wait a few more seconds. Okay, we'll close the poll in about 5 or 10 seconds. So just hang on. Okay, so I think that should about do it. So let me click end poll, and hopefully that'll see. So can you guys like see the see the results there on your screens? Yeah, Jan and Sarah?
No, I don't see
Okay,
the
so hang on, let me
results.
see end poll and see if that works. Um, share results. There we go. That should do it. Okay, can you guys see it now?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, let me just throw it out to you guys.
Yeah.
You know, does this surprise you, you know, based on what you see out there?
No, I mean that's kind of the main. If I had to just isolate one main message here, it pretty much addresses the first 2 points here, which is the biggest issue is data and quantification. And it's really important essentially um, to have a system, whether it's internal or external. There has been a lot of innovation in this space that in year one enables you to have that data and being able to quantify impacts and ROI, right? Yeah, so that's I think is really key.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So hang on. So let me click stop sharing. Okay, great. Fine. So let's move on. We're getting close to the close here. But you know, Jan and Sarah, you know, for sustainability leaders facing all these challenges, you know, who want to start now and see measurable results in 12 months, you know, where would you guys say they should focus first?
Well, just building on the survey results and what I just said now, essentially my just make sure you have a system that in year one, not in a decade, not in 2 years, not in 3 years, but in year one enables you to have three things. The first one is not only a corporate footprint, but a footprint of each single product you have and all the variations. It's totally doable in year one. The cost of doing so has dramatically reduced, and sales happens at the product level. So that's sales enablement. From a cost standpoint, make sure you have a system that enables you to not depend on outside advice, but to leverage internal capabilities of all your facility managers, all the discussions you have with vendors, with a system that enables you to evaluate. We showed that marginal abatement cost curve, but enables you to have a dynamic, living way to optimize your spending to reduce your cost. It's all about data and to calculate ROI. And the third one is from a risk standpoint, not have only high level investor risk assessment, but make it really operational. And all these three things go to having data. Once you have the data in place and a good system to slice and dice it, you can do so much more. And you can move beyond this extremely high level, you know, what is good for business is good for society, which is typically a very empty statement, to actually being able to substantiate it.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Oh yeah, sorry. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if there's time, I could give my 2 cents. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that the focus is right to be on revenue, and that is really what drives the conversation most of the time. And it does come back to product sustainability, customer buy-in, customer requirements. And so on your product sustainability. So my most essential advice would be to define your strategy for scope 3 mitigation and product footprinting together. There's these responsibilities have historically sat in different groups within organizations. But you can find a provider now who can develop an activity-based inventory in year one that provides you with product footprinting results alongside your corporate inventory. And it's going to help you with your mitigation action, and it's going to help you with that outreach and engagement and quantifying the business value of your product sustainability.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we're a little bit over time, and I'd still like to have I'd still like to do a quick Q&A if we can, because there's a lot of questions that came in. I don't think we'll get to all of them, but for those that we don't, Bureau Veritas will answer your questions after the call. Before we get to that, though, I just wanted once again to put on screen the QR code. Like I said earlier in the call, participants on the call. Are eligible for a complimentary 30-minute consultation with Sarah. So the QR code should be on your screen right now, and we'll keep it there for a minute. And yeah, let me just get to some quick, at least some of the questions. Okay, can you expand more about activity-based inventories and LCAs, and how do they compare to regular GHG emissions inventories?
I could cover that one. So activity-based inventories really start with having the data for your procured products in your ERP systems that have activity level data like quantities, units of materials, components. That is the biggest challenge to overcome, where you're not just starting with a spend amount, which you know you're going to have for anything that you purchase, but you know what is the amount of that product, that good, that material. And that's going to be the basis of your activity-based inventory, where you're using that information and tying it to LCA-based models for those emissions. And what it gives you is that kind of that deeper dive, that deeper granularity that Jan was showing a little bit on screen, where you have the ability to drill down into your suppliers, your components, your materials, and even look upstream, and gives you better insight to what your impacts are and what your actions can be. And in terms of LCAs, you know, LCAs it's the same methodology, but it's just applied on a different scale, where you're collecting the inputs, the outputs, and you're applying the LCA models, the background LCA data, to each of those inputs and outputs.
And I would just say one more thing. This used to be a very lengthy process, but not, there's just a lot of technologies out there that enable you to ingest data, whatever data you have. No data is perfect. Whatever data volume or weight data, product data a company has, and ingest it, create a replicable system year on year. So there's very little human intervention, and essentially build these life cycle assess process-based LCA, as it's called, or activity-based LCA, that give you all that granularity that we just described.
Okay, great. Let's just do one more if you guys don't mind sticking around for a couple more minutes. I think this one's for Jan. You know, you're mentioning the surgical approach of identifying the highest risk for water supply. You mentioned collecting data from everyone is costly and laborsome. You know, where does the data come from? You know, like what's the surgical pinpointing based on?
Yeah. So the key here, and we often say to clients, let's focus on the 98% you don't need to do. What often happens, right? The typical way is let's just go ask suppliers. So you ask everybody. It's like carpet bombing suppliers. It has all these limitations of just asking tier one suppliers who only represent 25% of your impact anyway, etc. So instead, when you do this activity-based modeling, before you ask any supplier, you start having a pretty granular view of where these impacts can be in tier one, in tier two, in tier three, and above. Okay. And so based on that, and it's model data, so it could be wrong, right? So it's pretty granular. And some providers today have really granular activity-based LCA. In our case, we have about 500,000 processes that have been modeled. So it's pretty good. And the nice thing is you can have it in year one, right? For not only the corporation, but also all your products, right? So that enables you to, first off, identify the 98% things that are not going to move the needle. So let's not worry about this. And then you zoom in on the 2%, whether it's on risk with water or whether it's on greenhouse gases in reducing material composition of a specific component, etc. But you have the data to engage intelligently with your suppliers, and you give your suppliers the kind of good arguments to decommodify their sales, because if they are able to reduce your scope 3, they can use this for other buyers as well. So it sort of aligns incentives between the two. Because really, a question is also, why would the supplier help here, right? So this kind of more intelligent approach enables kind of really for you to do much less and for suppliers to do stuff that's actually useful rather than just fill another questionnaire.
Okay, awesome. So there's a few more questions, guys, but like I said, hopefully Bureau Veritas will try to get to them all to you after the call. And that brings us to the end of the session. So thank you again to our panelists, Jan and Sarah, and to the team at Bureau Veritas. And thanks to all of you for joining. We'll send out a link to everybody who's joined today with a recording of today's webinar in the coming days, which will also be available on the resources page on ESG Today. So thanks everyone for joining, and hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Yeah, thanks.